you all for being here this morning. Now we're going to get started. We have got Jake Sherman, one of the founders of Punchbowl News, and we're going to be joined by Senator Jeanne Shaheen on stage for a conversation about news of the day, small business policy, and America's economic future. Senator, please, we will look forward to having you on stage with us. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We'll have you in the middle here. Okay.
Hey, Senator.
All right, well, let's start this conversation as we always do here with a few news of the day questions, and there is no shortage of it. We are 43 days from the election. Jake, I'm going to kick it over to you.
So, Senator, the UN General Assembly is this week. You are intimately and intricately involved in the Senate's probably outsized role of any parliament in the world on foreign policy. There are a lot of geopolitical issues right now, to say the least. What are you focused on seeing in New York, and what will have your attention as the Assembly kicks off this week? Choose maybe 60 or 70 things. I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, I actually wish I felt better about the ability of the UN General Assembly to actually address some of the real conflicts that we're seeing around the world, particularly what's happening in the Middle East. Not just the war in Gaza, but also the expansion of what seems to be the expansion into Lebanon, which is getting much more concerning. Obviously, I would like to see some announcement from the United States for Ukraine for the use of long-range weapons, because I think we should not hobble the Ukrainians as they're fighting for their lives and for democracies around the world. So those are the two big issues that I'm hoping we will hear some movement on. The war in Sudan is another one, the conflict there, where it's not getting much attention, and yet we have millions of people who are on the verge of famine, and too many people dying there as well. So sadly, as you point out, there are a lot of hot spots in the world right now, and I hope the UN General Assembly will really look at what the world can do to try and address them.
So the Congress is once again kind of passing a CR, hopefully this week, with a December 20th deadline, basically shaping up to have an omnibus at the end of the year. You have Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Capitol Hill this week. Do you expect more Ukraine funding before the end of the year that the Congress will have to put in there?
Well, certainly not in the CR. Yeah. I think that will be up for debate as we get into passing the budget before the end of the year. Yeah. Hopefully, the current CR that's on the books will go until December 20th, right, which means that hopefully we can put together the rest of the budget between now and December 20th. 11 of those appropriations bills have passed the Senate, and the House has a very different version of the budget, so we'll have to negotiate that.
Would you support more funding for Ukraine in the end of year package?
I would if there is a case to be made that will make a difference for Ukraine.
Let's talk quickly, and then we'll get into the topic of the day. Let's talk quickly about the election. We are 40-something days from the...
42, I think.
42 is right.
But who's counting?
You're not. Yeah.
I usually know that off the top of my head. You have an incredibly competitive Senate map, which Democrats are doing, I think, a lot better than a lot of people expected, a lot of the punditry class, which I will not count myself as part of, and a tight race for the presidency with Kamala Harris experiencing various surges over the last couple weeks. Give us your back-of-the-napkin take on where Democrats are.
Well, obviously, I think Kamala Harris is going to hold on to the White House, and we're going to hold the majority in the Senate. So,
optimistic.
That's my line, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay,
right.
Fair enough.
Let's shift to the topic of the day, small business policy and the economic future of America. You chair the Senate Small Business Committee. Can you talk about your role there and what initiatives you've worked on this past Congress?
Yeah, and let me say it's a real honor to be able to chair the Small Business Committee. My husband and I started our life with a small business, a seasonal business in York Beach, Maine. And when we started actually, he started it about 3 months before we got married, and when he started it, he and his partner had $800 each, and so they went around and collected all the relatives' wedding gifts and sold them.
Did he pay him back at any point, or? No comment.
No comment. If they still had their wedding gifts, they probably were not very sellable. But one day somebody drove up and said, "Where can I get a cord of wood?" And his partner said, "Here, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock." So that was sort of the way we started our business. And by the time we left the business, my husband and I, and it's still going on, it paid for our down payment on our house. It put us both through graduate school and gave us a real start in life. So I appreciate the importance of small businesses and what they mean to this country. You talked about, or at least in the opening remarks, talked about the number of people who are employed by small businesses. It's over 50% of our workforce in the country. But my favorite statistic about small businesses is that they create 16 times more patents per employee than large businesses. So the innovation that we're creating in this country is really coming from small business. And we've looked at a number of challenges that small businesses are currently facing and are trying to think about how we can better address those in the committee. So every business that I've gone to since COVID, they've had 3 issues. They've been housing, which is a huge challenge, childcare, and workforce. And what we have looked at in the committee is how can we think about childcare and help small businesses with childcare, because for large businesses, often they can provide subsidies to their employees, they can support childcare in-house, but small businesses don't have that opportunity. So thinking about how can we invest in childcare in ways that help small business. Housing is a huge challenge. So we have a separate committee that deals with housing. But the reality is if businesses can't find housing for their employees, they can't get employees. And so we've got to do better in this country to address that. One of the things that I have really worked on for a long time is helping small business get into international markets. We know that most markets are outside of the United States, 95% or so. Only about 4% of small and medium-sized businesses are doing business outside of the United States. So thinking about how do we help small business get into those international markets is really critical. Back in 2010, I sponsored legislation to create this State Trade Expansion Program, the STEP program, and it is still going. And we have made some changes in it this year to try and make it work better for small business to deal with some of the paperwork because regulation is a challenge. But it's been important. And in New Hampshire, I just went to the air show in Farnborough because our biggest export is aeronautics, aerospace. And the companies that were there were able to be there with a booth at Farnborough because of the STEP program. They were able to use that money. So thinking about all of the things we need to do to support small businesses is what we try and do on the committee. We have a report that's going to be coming out, I think, after the election that looks at rural America. And so many of our small businesses are in rural America, and how do we better support them?
So the lame duck session is typically an opportunity for Congress to get some things done that haven't been able to get done all year. Surely you have some priorities in the small business realm and the economy realm that you'd like to see get done. What are those?
Well, we're actually feeling optimistic that a number of our bills are on the defense bill. Oh. And so they will go with the defense bill, barring...
With the NDAA, yep.
With the NDAA, barring any problem. I serve on the Armed Services Committee as well, so we've been able to
so you have the inside track.
Shepherd those along. But one of the things that I'm most committed to that has been challenging is the Small Business Innovation Research Program and the Small Business Technology Transfer Program, which are both really important in promoting innovation. Mm-hmm. And I would like to see us reauthorize those indefinitely. That's still a fight that we haven't been able to resolve. But hopefully we will be able to get an extension and make some changes that will be important to make them work better.
I want to drill down on some of the things you were talking about, kind of the 3 issues that you've seen on the committee. We've been traveling around the country and holding conversations about the challenges small business owners have had coming out of COVID. We've been in New Hampshire, actually. We most recently were in Birmingham, Alabama, Arkansas, North Dakota. First thing that always comes up is childcare. We consistently hear it, finding options. It's one of the biggest problems for small businesses as they try to compete against some of those larger employers. In April, you put out the Child Care Crisis Report. What was that?
Well, it was designed to try and point out the challenges that we have with childcare. And, you know, it's not just that people need access to childcare, and so they're looking for opportunities, but 99% of our childcare businesses are small businesses. So they also have the problem. And sadly, what we have is, I think the average wage for a childcare worker is just under $15 an hour. You know, the future of this country is in the hands of our childcare workers, and we need to recognize how important that is and support them. It's the biggest problem. Every childcare center that I've been to, their biggest challenge is keeping staff and workers because they can't pay them enough. And on the other hand, the biggest challenge that most families have is the cost of childcare. In New England, we're one of the most expensive parts of the country for childcare. And in New England, for most families, after their mortgage, or their housing, it's their second highest cost. So we've got to do a better job. This is something, you know, my first child was born in 19...
Something.
I'm trying to, 74.
Okay.
My last child went off to college in 2004. So I had kids at home for 30 years. And childcare was always an issue, always. And I had resources. I had a husband. I had family. So for families that don't have that access and help, it's a huge problem. And it's affecting our future. You know, one of our biggest allies when I was governor as we were trying to work on childcare was the military. Because the military did a study a long time ago that said most of the people who go into the military are children of members of the military. And if we don't do a good job with those kids, then we're not going to have the pool that we need of people in the military later on. And so they've been a huge asset as we think about this and convincing people they're an unlikely messenger for why this is so important for us. And again, we've got to do a better job. And that's the point that we're trying to make.
You have 2 bills in the small business realm that you're working on with Republicans, probably more, but I'll ask you about one of them. The Thrive Act, which is you're working on with Senator Cassidy, and it deals with trying to lock in or trying to manage commodity prices and lock in things like the price of gas or lumber. Where does that stand? And can you talk about that for a minute?
Well, we just introduced it. Senator Cassidy from Louisiana is my co-sponsor. My view is that in order to get things done, it's important to work in a bipartisan way. And so we've tried to do that, and the committee has always tried to work that way. And what it would do is allow small businesses to hedge on commodities. So for big businesses, you know, they can often lock in prices for energy costs, for gasoline, for commodities, but small businesses can't do that. And this would give the SBA oversight over this program and allow small businesses to think about and to actually hedge on some of those prices. And one of the things that I was just hearing this morning is that one of our businesses who's part of the Goldman Sachs program in New Hampshire's coffee, does coffee, and they're very interested in this idea because coffee, of course, is one of those commodities that pricing goes up and down. So this would give them a real benefit. So hopefully we can move this bill.
You're also working across the aisle with Iowa Republican Joni Ernst on a bill looking to improve government contracting, simplifying procedures. It's something that we've been on stage with small business owners as they try to kind of get government contracts, the challenges that go into them when they don't have huge compliance. operations and arms within their systems. What are your hopes for this legislation?
Well, again, probably one of the biggest complaints I hear from small business is access to government contracts and how to do that. And it's complicated, it's bureaucratic, the regulations are difficult, they're complex, and for most small businesses, they don't have people, they don't have attorneys on staff, they don't have people who can figure this out. So I think most people recognize this is a big issue. So hopefully we can move this bill because it's bipartisan. I think we have a real opportunity to do that.
Goldman Sachs recently made a $100 million commitment for rural small businesses. We've been, as Anna said, all over talking about this. The challenges they face often occur when it comes to attracting talent and upskilling. What have you, I mean, we've heard a lot about that, and it's a big issue. What are some of your reflections on that?
You know, workforce in general is a challenge in America right now. I was at the Kennedy School back in the early 2000s because I was the director of the Institute of Politics. And at that time, the dean of the Kennedy School was a workforce expert. His name was David Elwood. And I remember him showing us charts of what was going to happen to the workforce by the time we got to the late teens and early 20s. And he said we're going to be relying on older workers and immigrants because our birth rate is not such that we're producing the people who can take the jobs that we're creating. Now, we're not in as difficult a state as Japan or South Korea, which have a really low birth rate, but it's a challenge, and we have to think about it. We're doing a lot of things that are really interesting in New Hampshire, partnering with our community college system, partnering with high schools. I think looking at things like apprenticeship programs and certification programs. So for a lot of people, they don't need or want a four-year college degree. So thinking about how we provide the support to get them into the workforce is really important. But the reality is we got to find a way to encourage more people in the workforce.
As much as we've heard about a lot of these challenges, we kind of just have gone over housing, childcare, workforce development, and Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Voices surveys. I think one of the kind of special things about this partnership has been the inspiring stories. Honestly, you go around the country and we'll hear some stories today of just kind of perseverance and inspiration. As two small business owners ourselves, the ability to take a leap I
sometimes forget that.
It's its own thing.
I get reminded all the time.
How can you help foster that spirit? What have you heard from small business owners in New Hampshire that make you kind of get up in the morning and get excited about this kind of policy?
Well, and it is one of the things that makes America so unique,
right,
is that we have that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. You're going to hear from some folks, I think, this morning who can talk about that. And to hear from people who have an idea and they see a pathway and what they need is some help often. I'm a big fan of the small business development centers because I think they're a great way to help our small businesses and the SBA, and often access to capital is a real challenge, particularly in minority communities, and just getting started. So one of the real inspirational stories, I think everybody here is going to get a bag as you leave. In that bag is going to be Port City pretzels from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is a real family story. I think it was the grandmother who started experimenting, putting seasoning on pretzels, and the woman who now runs the program is expanding across New Hampshire. You'll see how great these pretzels are. It's everything from cinnamon and sugar to seasoning that's more salty. But again, she took this idea and she's making it work. She's employing some people in the disabilities community, so really contributing to her community and making her small business work.
Let's talk briefly, and we're almost out of time, about the one of the things we're going to be focused on very intently next year, which is tax policy. We have a bunch of tax rates expire at the end of next year. This is going to be something, presumably, that every member of Congress is going to spend a lot of time and energy and brain space thinking about how do you think about that right now, and how do you approach some of the small business issues when it comes to the expiration of the tax rates at the end of 25?
You know, it's really frustrating because we had a bill that passed the House overwhelmingly, over 300 votes in the House earlier this year, that includes the R&D tax credit, it includes a child tax credit, not as an expansive one as we had passed before, a number of other provisions that are important to small business. And it has been held up over partisan politics in the Senate by one person in a way that is really frustrating for people in this country. We should not allow that to happen. So I'm hopeful that we may, before the end of this year, at least get some of those tax provisions through. I think it's important.
Presumably, if Kamala Harris wins, you might have a chance of getting that through in the lame duck. Is that your thinking?
I think, yes. I think depending on the outcome of the election, a lot of what happens between now and the end of the year will depend on the outcome of the election.
One last question here. Manufacturing Month is next month. A lot of small businesses are manufacturers. Talk to us about kind of how you see manufacturing in America and its importance and its role.
Really important. I can remember having conversations in the Senate with folks making the complaint that we don't make things in America anymore. But we are making things in America now. And we've had a number of manufacturing businesses come back to the United States. And we've done a number of things in Congress to try and promote that. The most notable is the CHIPS and Science Act, recognizing that semiconductors used to be produced in the United States. The innovation used to be here. So much of them now are, I think about 2/3 more than that are being produced in Taiwan. And that's not in our national security interest. So we've got to think about how to bring them back to the United States. So we passed that legislation, and we are promoting a semiconductor industry now in the United States that is going to make a huge difference. And as you know, those are in everything from appliances to missiles. So we've got to have an industry here that works.
All right, Senator Shaheen, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much this
Thank
morning.
you.
We appreciate it.
Nice to see you.